Great. Thank you for inviting me and putting this together. This is a fantastic audience and of colleagues, and I'm excited to tell you about what we're doing over on the St. Paul campus, about 10 minutes from here. We're the Polar Geospatial Center, part of the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department, which is here in this building. So I first want to start by acknowledging, I know I'm already cutting into the break that was scheduled, but I wanted to thank the team that I'm very lucky to lead in PGC. This is a group that's kind of self-selected out to science support specialists. These are people who really like helping other people make their science better. We're funded primarily by the Office of Polar Programs with NSF, but as I'll describe in this presentation, we work between the poles as well, and specifically with high-resolution satellite imagery and 3D topography. And I'll particularly acknowledge Claire Porter, who has been at PGC for a very long time and has led the production of these elevation models that I'll be telling you about. So starting really, really big scale here in terms of, we're in the business of Earth observation, particularly from satellite imagery. And the way it's always sort of had to be is that you start with, when you're looking at the Earth from the top down, with satellites, you start at pretty coarse data at the global scale, and coarse in sort of our business is in the tens of meters per pixel, still quite good. And then you zoom in into targeted areas, and if you're using satellite imagery, you might be able to get some data, or you're flying a LiDAR or drone work. You can access data at the sort of sub-meter per pixel scale, the sort of very local resolution. And we're right now on this shift of sort of bridging this gap where we now are able to observe and measure properties of the surface of the Earth, the continental surface of the Earth, at meter scale at a global extent. So it's an incredibly exciting time, and I'm happy to share with you our PGC's contribution to this effort in terms of taking this local scale and making it global. And this is really the result of a quarter century of successful observing of the Earth from space. Primarily driven, when we're talking at sort of meter scale resolution, this is driven in the US by commercial satellites. So the IKONOS spacecraft satellite sort of broke the sub-meter barrier for non-classified data that had been achieved before with classified data. But really at the turn of the century is when imaging the Earth at meter scale became viable. And this is mostly done, you're probably quite familiar with Vantor, you might know them as Maxar, or you may have known them as Digital Globe, they keep changing their name, and Planet, who is mapping the surface of the Earth at about 3 meters per pixel, the entire surface at about 3 meters per pixel every day. So an unbelievable time to look at the surface of the Earth from space. One of the reasons PGC exists, the Polar Geospatial Center, is that the orbital geometry of these imagers in orbit around the Earth is very strongly benefits the poles. They're in polar orbits, so they're crossing over the poles all the time. So we get repeat coverage at these high latitudes quite frequently, several times a day at some locations. But there's also the geopolitics that these satellites were not built for scientific purposes. So at low latitudes, they're in competition, mostly with the intelligence community. These satellites are funded mostly by the US intelligence community. But at the poles, where there's less political tension, at least certainly in the Antarctic, and less commercial competition for resources on these spacecraft, we get the data that we want at the poles. So I was preparing this talk and I was like, I'm basically trying to persuade all these people to work at the poles because there's a lot of data access benefits to it, as I'll describe. So the systems in place to acquire these data are really efficient and really good. We have tons of data streaming down from these satellites daily, hourly, every minute. Distributing the data is a real challenge, and that's going to be the fly in the ointment that I sort of end this talk with. And we're quite focused on is how to get these data in the hands of more scientists. We work with very high resolution satellite imagery, 30 centimeter, 50 centimeter per pixel, multispectral and panchromatic imagery of the surface of the Earth. That's a big part of what we do. Well, I'm going to be talking mostly here, given the nature of this audience, about the 3D models that we're able to generate from these images. And just a really quick demonstration that the way that worldview satellites, that's Maxar or Vantor, works is that they pass over a landscape, they take an image front-looking, and then they do a rear-looking. So they collect it as they're approaching the surface, and then they turn and collect it on the back end as well, creating two images with enough parallax to use software that our colleagues and I write and run to make 3D models at near the resolution of the imagery itself. So the taking one step back, what's the value of this sort of sub-meter, meter scale elevation? It's probably obvious to a lot of people in this room, but I sort of recommend this paper by Tiroli from 2014 of the sort of, obviously with this meter scale topography, you can document smaller landforms, that sort of makes sense. And that are localized and might be more dynamic at a smaller scale. This measuring the surface of the Earth at the meter scale introduces more texture. You can sort of see the landform, but then this provides sort of surface texture that you wouldn't otherwise get at the 10s to 20, 30 meter resolution. And finally, the sort of growth industry with data at this resolution is understanding the built environment. So human infrastructure, and not just human beavers, if you're going to be at Emily Fairfax's clinic later, this is data that's sufficient to resolve and not just observe, but to measure the changes to the Earth at the meter scale. Just to give you sort of a sense of what we're talking about, this is the Yukon River Delta in Alaska, in Vantor multispectral imagery. If you zoom in on one of these meander bends, in imagery, this is the sort of sub-meter panchromatic imagery. At the global scale, our global elevation models, before we took on the challenge of modeling the surface of the Earth at really high meter scale resolution, would be this. So you can go out and get this from Copernicus. This is a shaded relief map at 30 meters per pixel. And you can make out sort of the broad structure of the river, but not too much detail in it. The Arctic DEM project that PGC generated at 2 meters per pixel resolves the surface at this fidelity. So when I talk about the potential for noticing more small-scale landforms and surface texture, this is the sort of leap that we're making for data at the global scale. So we've been able to produce data of this quality for a long, long time with drones and LiDAR, but not only locally. And now we're at the stage where we can render and measure the surface at this resolution at continental and now global extents. One more example from Iceland is so the previous standard, 30 meters per pixel of global elevation. If you switch to the 2 meter per pixel Arctic DEM, and remember I mentioned how the built environment is a road that you're sort of starting to resolve the built environment within the natural landscape of Iceland, which you can now do with the stereo elevation models that we've been able to produce. So that is sort of the end result of a lot of work. It all starts for us with the satellite tasking. So we are funded by the Office of Polar Programs to integrate and work with National Geospatial Intelligence Agency to task satellite images. So we solicit requests from our user community, deconflict the options, make maps like this, and submit them to the federal government, who then sends them to the company Maxar Vantor that collects the data. And as I was mentioning, there's so little competition at high latitudes that we typically get the data that we request, our users do. And we're able to generate elevation models. And this is a density map. I apologize, the bottom of the scale is 0, as you might imagine. But there are areas of high scientific and cultural interest where we have over 50 elevation models in time series. So you can measure the change of the surface in 3D at some of these locations. So tremendous density of data to measure the dynamics, the D and MDS, for how the Earth is changing over time. And this is what it looks like on one glacial front on the western coast of Greenland. Reminder, this is a shaded relief of the elevation models that we're able to produce. So you're looking at topography here, not a visible image. So Jesse Baker from our team put this together with some tools that are open source tools that are now available to co-register and render these models in 3D over time and make these measurements that you otherwise wouldn't be able to make. And you can do this anywhere on Earth that has this type of temporal coverage. The two sort of flagship products that we produced are the reference elevation model of Antarctica, REMA. There are now 2 versions about it. We're about to apply to make a third to document more change at the South Pole. And Arctic DEM. So the geographic constraints are, with some exceptions, 60 degrees and poleward in each case. And I'm pleased to say that these data are almost without exception publicly available. So you can go to the PGC website, the Fridge tool that I'll be talking about, to access these data. And you can download the individual strips or the mosaics right now. Through some negotiations, more recent data of Alaska is now licensed. So any elevation models past 2022, when the license was last renegotiated, are not publicly available because Vantor wants to sell data to oil companies there. So we are a small player in those negotiations, but we were able to maintain the publicly, Vantor wanted to license the entire Arctic, and we were able to convince them not to, except for recent data of Alaska. You can go to Fridge right now and highlight data and download it yourself. This is an incredibly efficient way to visualize the data that are out there, select the ones that you want, and access it right away. So what impact has this had on the polar community before I start talking about non-polar communities? So the polar research community, those who have access to all of these resources through the Office of Polar Programs, in terms of the satellite imagery, in addition to the publicly available topography, are now doing more and more work at the continental scale at extremely high resolution. So I'll just pick out a few recent publications looking at thaw slumps that have been automatically detected and measured from Arctic DEM. And these are threats to communities all across the Arctic. You can sort of see the mapping, these pan-Arctic studies that are challenging to resolve in the coarser resolution elevation models, but now you get high precision measurements of where these thaw slumps are, and those are used to inform communities at risk of these thaw slumps for further recession. River mapping using combined Sentinel-2 publicly available satellite imagery combined with Arctic DEM and some neural networks to do high resolution river mapping with these resources, which is fantastic to see work at this resolution and this scale taking off. So the polar community is thinking more and more of high resolution at continental scales. And we're at the point now, due to the success of these imagers over the last 25 years, is that we can now generate 2 meter per pixel elevation models over most of the Earth's continental surface. And not only can we do it, we have done it. And this is the distribution map of data. So it's not entirely global. You can see, you can figure out where the cloud belt is. This is just flat out due to atmospheric interference with with the orbiters, leading to these gaps. But almost everywhere else that you see this sort of cranberry red color is where we have individual strip DEMs and then mosaics at 2 meters per pixel from 60 degrees south to 60 degrees north. So these data exist. The distribution of them is really hard, which is I'll talk about in a minute. But you can go anywhere and get data of similar quality to this. This is the summit of Mount Baldy in the San Gabriel Mountains outside of Los Angeles. And these are 10-meter contours with 100-meter thicker contours here. So just The quality can vary, certainly, based on sort of the atmospheric conditions and the canopy. The stereo technique doesn't do well with trees. You need LiDAR for that. So there are some limitations, but in terms of the resolution and the scale and the temporal frequency, the revisit rate, we're not aware of any other way to do this at this scale. So getting back to the earlier discussion of the success of these imagers over the last quarter century, I said the fly in the ointment was going to be this distributing the data, and it's a real challenge and something that we're doing our best to navigate and get as much data in as many people's hands as possible. That EarthDem project, when it was started in 2018 or so, was intended to be publicly released, and lawyers got involved, and the Maxar said that doesn't work with their commercial interest, so it got negotiated out. So these data are all acquired by Vantor, the data that we use, I should say. Maxar and Vantor exist because the US government contracts them to collect this data, typically for national security purposes. But the data that are acquired are licensed for use by anybody who is federally funded. So that includes federally funded researchers like me, and I'm sure many people in this room. So if you do have federal funding, technically you are licensed to use these data. So imagery, the full resolution imagery that these orbiters collect are licensed. But the general rule is that derived products that do not trace back to the original data are freely distributed except for DEMs. And this is in place because of PGC. We started making all these elevation models. Maxar said, we want to do that too, and we want to sell them. So they renegotiated the license to make these, to make the elevation models licensed, just like the imagery. PGC fought hard to have Arctic DEM and REMA, the polar elevation models, be exceptions. That was able to happen, but this is the reason that we can't release the EarthDem data to the public. It breaks our heart. We wish we could, but you have to be federally funded to get the data. So how do you go about doing that? For the polar elevation models, as I mentioned, go to Fridge, scroll around, select your region of interest, and download the data. You never even have to email us. It's just there. They're available as cloud-optimized geotiffs as well, so you can, with stack metadata as well. So we've sort of done everything possible to conform our data to modern workflows. We really love seeing people do great science with these data. So with the exception of recent data from Alaska, these are all publicly available. EarthDem is a completely different story. We partner with NASA's Commercial Satellite Data Acquisition Program, and they have agreed to host EarthDem for federally funded researchers. So you fill out a form with them, they verify that you're federally funded, and then you have the ability to access these data for free to the researchers. But this has been a very, very slow process. They don't have all the data. It's a challenging time for anybody in a federal agency right now, specifically on the science side, and it's not moving as quickly as we'd like. So we're hoping that this is going to happen soon. Right now, if you want this data right now, the best thing to do is to contact us at PGC. So we now can distribute EarthDem data to federally funded researchers through our brand new Fridge subscription program. So the bad news is we do have to charge for this because we don't have an agency funding the cyber infrastructure to do this or our staff to make the data available to non-polar researchers. So we're charging at cost right now, which is $4,600 for 250 credits. And this is mostly for licensed imagery that is processed and analysis ready, which you're not able to get from other services, and at scale. So you can batch order data with us. You can, if you email us at PGC support, and with documentation that you're federally funded, we can set you up with an exploratory account for free, so you can see what data are available before you decide if you want to pay to actually download the data. But it takes staff to manually verify that people are eligible to access the data. That costs money in addition to the incredible cyber infrastructure that we need to support to maintain this data. So we've set up the accounting to do this. We've also set up more accounting to do more custom projects with people. So in that case, if you want to do something bigger than what you can do through Fridge subscription or more custom, we have an incredible team of geospatial specialists who deal with remote sensing data all the time, not just at the polls. So just reach out to me. I have handouts here for the Fridge subscription to give you any details that you want. But that's all I've got, and happy to take any more questions. Wait, sorry, you should.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Limited to data that are immediately relevant projects you're funded on, or you can get access to everything?
Great question. The question was, if you're federally funded and request data, are you limited to the project that you were federally funded to do? The answer is yes. So if you're federally funded to do something somewhere and then you're requesting data that is clearly not relevant, that's a problem. We don't really have an enforcement ability to that, but the general rule is that it's for data for the specific project that you're funded to do.
I'm wondering if I could use the data, and you said that if I produce a new product, I can distribute that. So let's say I use the DMs to generate some publication, but I don't publish the DM, but just the results. Would that be okay?
Yes, yes. So the question is, if you use the DEMs to produce results that you then publish in a paper, but you're not releasing the elevation model itself, is that okay? The answer is yes. You can request to release the data as well, and our team has the relationships in place to submit those requests. And so if you do have commercially licensed imagery and you want to put it in a paper, we have the forms to do that. So you can do that, you just need permission from the government to do that and stuff. So we work with users all the time who want to do that. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks so much for advertising how awesome tools are. My question is, with EarthDem and ArcticDem, you mentioned the canopy issue. Are you all experimenting with correcting that with like ISAT-2 or other spaceborne altimetry, or is that in the hands of the scientists?
That specific task is in the hands of the scientists. We use ISAT-2 for absolute tying of elevation, calibration of taking our relative elevations and tying them to the ground and stuff. We haven't used it. There's potential to do sort of local LiDAR integration stuff, but we've not used ISAT-2 for that purpose. Yeah, good idea.
One last question. Oh, yep, I see Dan there.
Right.
First, you might get better data.
Yep.
Second of all, it might get you out.
Yeah. It's in the works in a brainstorming sense. NISAR is one that we kind of have our eyes on for because it's sort of publicly funded, so the data would be publicly accessible. So we see those as potential complements to the 25-year record that we have now in terms of documenting surface change, that those products can sort of build upon the archive that we already have. So the ability to take that data and use it publicly is extremely enticing to us for all these messy reasons that you see here.